This episode of Thinking in English is sponsored by Thinking in English Classes. Thinking in English Classes offer English classes, tuition, lessons, courses, and more for listeners of Thinking in English. You can take private classes with professional teachers, join in with some amazing group classes, or take one of their incredible courses. Actually, this summer, in a few weeks' time, they are launching courses on pronunciation, films, poetry for English learners, as well as their level boost courses designed to take you from B1 to C1 level English learners. You can check out more information about Thinking in English classes by going to their website, thinkinginenglish.link. I'll put the link in the description down below. Now, why should you join the Thinking in English classes? You've heard me talk about them before, so instead I'm going to read some of our student reviews. Review 1. I love the mood and positive energy of the teachers and participants. The self-study before the lesson is very engaging and useful. Review number 2. It feels like you've read my mind every week and chosen the topics that engage me most. So for me, it's amazing. I can't wait for the next one. And review number 3, I like classes because I can increase advanced vocabulary related to topics. I make a habit of looking up words using the custom glossary worksheets that are exclusive for Thinking in English classes members. So, what are you waiting for? You've heard from the students, you've heard from me. Go to thinkinginenglish.link and sign up right now. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. On July 4th, 2024, the UK will hold a general election to elect a new government, parliament and Prime Minister. In this episode, I want to provide a detailed and thorough explanation and introduction to how elections work in the United Kingdom. Hopefully you'll listen and learn lots of new vocabulary and information about elections. You can find the full transcript for this episode for free over on my website and also on Spotify. Here is today's vocabulary list. Prime Minister. Prime Minister. The head of government in a parliamentary system who is responsible for running the government. For example, the Prime Minister announced new measures to improve the economy. Parliament. Parliament. The supreme legislative body in a country, made up of elected representatives who make and pass laws. As in, the new bill was debated in Parliament before it was passed. Election. Election. A formal process by which voters choose individuals to hold public office. For example, the general election will be held next month to elect new members of Parliament. Government. Government. The governing body of a nation, responsible for making and enforcing laws and policies. As in, the government introduced a new healthcare policy to benefit all citizens. Vote. Vote. To cast a ballot in an election. As in, she decided to vote for the candidate who promised better education reforms. Constituency. Constituency. A geographical area represented by an elected official in a legislative body. For example, each MP represents a constituency and addresses the concerns of its residents. Campaign. Campaign. To work actively to promote a candidate, cause or policy. As in, the candidate campaigned vigorously across the country to gain support. Let's start with a brief introduction to the UK political system, because it might be quite different to the system used in your country. The United Kingdom is both a constitutional monarchy and a parliamentary democracy. What does this mean? A constitutional monarchy means that the UK has a monarch, a king, as the head of state. As it is a constitutional monarchy, however, the role of head of state is largely ceremonial and symbolic, and the real political power is controlled by an elected parliament. Every country has a head of state, but their roles and powers differ. We usually distinguish between the head of state and the head of government. In the UK, the current head of state is King Charles III, and the current head of government is Rishi Sunak. In the UK system, a parliamentary system, the head of government, so the Prime Minister, holds the real political power. In France, however, it is the head of state, President Macron, who holds most of the political power, not the Prime Minister. And in the USA, the head of state and the head of government is the same person, President Joe Biden. The UK's constitutional monarchy dates back centuries. The current monarch, as of 2024, is King Charles III. The king's roles include ceremonial duties, such as officially opening the parliament, and also some constitutional responsibilities, such as granting of royal assent to legislation passed by parliament. Basically, he gives permission for laws to be passed. However, the king only acts on the advice of the Prime Minister and the government. So really, it is the Prime Minister who has all the power. They are responsible for setting government policy, making high-level decisions, and representing the UK domestically and internationally. The UK Parliament is known as the Houses of Parliament. It is the place where all laws and decisions are debated, voted on, and decided. It is a bicameral parliament, which means there are two different houses that make up the parliament, and each house has a different role or function or represents different people. In the UK, the House of Commons is the most powerful and, I guess, main part of the Parliament. The House of Commons is composed of members of Parliament, we call them MPs, who are elected by the public in general elections. Each MP represents one of 650 constituencies across the UK. This means there are 650 members of Parliament. The House of Commons is responsible for making and passing laws, debating national issues, and checking the work of the government. The government is formed by the party that has the majority of seats in the House of Commons. The leader of the political party with the most seats in the House of Commons becomes the Prime Minister, who is the head of government. The current party with the most seats is the Conservative Party, and their leader is Rishi Sunak. The other house is the House of Lords. The House of Lords is appointed, not elected. We can't vote for the members of the Lords. Instead, the Prime Minister is able to choose and nominate members. There are also a number of lords who inherit their positions, and some senior religious figures who are automatically given seats in the House of Lords. Because it's not elected, the House of Lords has a very limited role. It mainly checks, revises, and suggests changes to laws. It cannot stop a law being passed. All it can do is suggest changes and delay it. Now we understand a little more about the UK political system. Let's get into the main topic: general elections. A general election is an election for choosing the representatives or leaders in government. Usually, general elections involve the entire country and every eligible voter, hence the term general. There are many different ways to conduct an election, with different voting systems and ways of calculating election results. The UK uses a first-past-the-post electoral system. The country is divided up into a number of electoral areas called constituencies. Each constituency is represented by one member of parliament, known as an MP. There are currently 650 constituencies spread across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. In each constituency, voters cast a single vote. So you have one vote for the person, the candidate, you want to win. While most candidates for elections are associated with political parties, they don't need to be. And in the election, you are technically voting for a person, a representative, rather than a party. In the first-past-the-post system, the candidate who gets the most votes wins. They don't need an absolute majority, right? They don't need over 50% of the votes. They just need to get the most votes. This system is a winner-takes-all approach. It is definitely not proportional to the actual votes of the country. The political party, or the candidate, that wins the most constituencies overall typically forms the government. The first-past-the-post system usually results in a clear majority for one party, but not always. For example, in 2010, it didn't produce a winner. This is a straightforward system, but it can result in disproportionate representation. For example, it is possible that a political party can win a lot of votes across the country, but not achieve many votes or many seats in the House of Commons. A party may achieve 15% of the votes across every constituency in the country, which would be nearly 100 seats if votes were proportional. But 15% is probably not enough to win in an individual constituency. You probably need 35 to 40 to 45%. So that party wouldn't win any seats at all. Elections in the UK are quite different from other countries, as there is no set date. They are typically held every 5 years, as this is the maximum time before an election is allowed to be called, but they can happen earlier. This year's general election will take place on July 4th, while the last election was 4.5 years ago, in December 2019, and the election before that was just 2 years before. I'll probably record a more detailed episode on the main UK political parties and who will perhaps win this election. But to understand British general elections, you do need to know some of the political parties. It is not a two-party system, although two of the parties are dominant. The Prime Minister is the leader of the political party with the most seats in Parliament. And although voters are technically voting for individual candidates in the elections, most British people tend to vote for the party they like. The Conservative Party is a centre-right, increasingly more right-wing, party. They are often referred to as the Tories, and they advocate for free market policies, a strong national defence, and traditional values. The Tories have been in power since 2010, and the last 5 prime ministers have all been Conservatives: David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. The Labour Party is the other main force in British politics. They are traditionally a centre-left party which support things like social equality, public welfare, and workers' rights. At the moment, it would seem like the Labour Party are the favourites to win this year's election, but this could change, and they were last in power from 1997 until 2010. The third party in the UK is the Liberal Democrats. They are a centrist party, so in between Labour and the Conservatives, and while very unlikely to win the overall election, they often win quite a few seats in Parliament. Between 2010 and 2015, the Liberal Democrats were in government as part of a coalition, a sharing agreement with the Conservative Party. Then there are smaller and regional parties who do win seats in elections. These include the Scottish National Party, the SNP, which is primarily focused on achieving Scottish independence and has been the most popular party in Scotland recently. Plaid Cymru is the Welsh Nationalist Party, focused on preserving Welsh culture and language, and they usually win a few seats in Wales. Northern Ireland has completely different political parties that I can't explain today, and then there are also some other minor parties that occasionally are successful in the UK too. Compared to elections in countries like the USA, the UK election process and schedule is much shorter and quite highly regulated. First, the current Prime Minister and government must call an election. They must announce the date of an election and give enough notice for it to happen. Elections are typically held on Thursdays. The election process formally begins with the dissolution of Parliament, which means the end of the current parliamentary sessions. Once Parliament is dissolved, all MPs, all members of Parliament, lose their seats, and parliamentary business is paused. This leaves the MPs free to campaign for their re-election without needing to worry about their responsibilities in Parliament. The period between the dissolution of Parliament and Election Day is known as the campaigning period. During this time, political parties and candidates actively work to gain the support of voters, and they have 6 weeks, 2 months to do this. Each political party publishes a manifesto, a detailed document outlining their policies, goals, and proposed legislation. Party leaders and candidates join in televised debates, radio interviews, and public discussions. Candidates and their supporters go door to door, go to people's doors, making personal appeals to voters. Public rallies and speeches and community events are organised to energise supporters and raise awareness about the party's platform. The UK, however, has pretty strong rules on election campaigns. For example, there are very, very strict spending limits. One amazing fact I found is that in 2012, the estimated total cost of the US election was $5.8 billion. And yes, of course, the USA is a bigger country than the UK. But in the 2010 UK election, so 2 years before that, the total spending of all political parties in the UK was just £31 million. So to make it clearer, the US election cost 120 times more than the UK election did. There is also a regulated period when you are allowed to actively campaign for general elections. Parties are not able to advertise on TV or radio. Instead, each party is given free time on TV. And the main TV channels must also remain neutral during the election. While the political parties and candidates are busy campaigning, there is also an effort to make as many people as possible register to vote. For a UK citizen to vote in the election, they must be registered. The entire campaigning period is relatively short in the UK. This election was announced at the end of May, and the vote will happen on July 4th, meaning there is just 6 weeks for parties to campaign and win votes. On July 4th this year, Election Day, voters will head to the polls to cast their ballots. The polls are the place where we vote, and casting ballots is the action of voting. Polling stations are set up in public buildings like schools, community centres, and town halls. In my hometown, for example, the polling stations are in the church hall and the public library. Each polling station serves a specific area, and voters must vote at the station they have been assigned. The polling stations are open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m, and voters who are already in the line at 10 p.m. are still allowed to vote. Once in the polling station, voters will receive a ballot paper. The ballot paper lists the candidates standing for the election in the voter's constituency. Voters mark an X next to their chosen candidate's name and place the completed ballot in a sealed box. There are other ways to vote too. Postal voting allows registered voters to cast their ballots by mail if they cannot or prefer to not vote in person on election day. And proxy voting enables a registered voter to appoint someone else to vote on their behalf if they are unable to vote in person on election day. Once polling stations close, the ballot boxes are transported to counting centres. The votes are then counted under strict supervision. Once all of the votes are counted, the results are announced. Each constituency announces their results. Some try to be as fast as possible. The outcome of the election determines the composition of the new government, and there are several possibilities. The most common is a majority government. If a single party, for example the Conservative Party, wins more than half of the seats in the House of Commons, so more than 326 seats, it can form a majority government. The leader of this party is invited by the king to become the prime minister. If no party achieves an outright majority, 2 or more parties may negotiate to form a coalition government. Coalition agreements involve compromises and shared policy platforms to ensure stable governments. The last coalition in the UK was between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrat Party. In cases where no coalition is possible and parties can't work together, a party with a significant number of seats may attempt to govern alone as a minority government. The king plays a ceremonial role again when he invites the leader of the party with the most seats to become prime minister. The prime minister then selects the members of his cabinet, his senior government officials. Shortly after the election, Parliament returns. The new MPs are sworn in. They take an oath or a promise before they are allowed to participate in Parliament. The House of Commons elects a Speaker to preside over its sessions. The Speaker's role is to maintain order during debates and ensure parliamentary rules are followed. The state opening of Parliament, the official opening of Parliament, is marked by the King's Speech, delivered by the monarch, by the King. The speech is written by the government and outlines the government's agenda, what they want to do in government, and their priorities for the upcoming parliamentary session. Then, the government and Parliament return to normal business until the next election is called. So here is today's final thought. Hopefully, after listening to this episode, you now have a clearer and deeper understanding of British politics and how elections work in the UK. Even if you don't care at all about British politics, much of the vocabulary I have used and introduced in this episode can be applied to elections and politics in other countries. How is the British electoral system, how are British elections different to your country's electoral system? What is similar? What is completely different? Let me know by leaving a comment. I'm really interested to see how British elections are different to elections across the world. You can comment on Spotify. You can comment on the Thinking in English blog on the transcript. The link's in the description. Or you can reach out to me on social media, Patreon or Discord. Patreon and Discord tend to be the best places to reach me. You can become a paid subscriber by clicking the link in the description and joining the Discord server and having conversations with me and joining in lots of great events we run. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.